Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who trains aardvarks for fun and profit, Mr. Ryan Seabold!
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
Good. Dude, you guys got that wildlife over there in Florida, and you got that, conservative make that money mentality. Beautiful business you got.
Hey, man, look, I was looking for a hobby. I opened up the dictionary, got to aardvark, stopped right there. Said, we're done. I'm done. Wasting no more time.
That's all we need.
Yes, absolutely. Aardvarks it is.
Yes, but actually, despite what our audience may think, we're not here to discuss aardvarks. We're here to discuss a movie, one hell of a movie. Ryan, do you have a description for us, sir?
Hell yeah, brother. Today's film is The Fly from 1986. And ooh, baby, are we getting into some body horror now. Directed by our friendly neighborhood Canadian doombringer, David Cronenberg, The Fly tells the story of Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, as he attempts to invent and perfect teleportation. Geena Davis co-stars as reporter Veronica, and the two proceed as a super-duper ill-fated Lois and Clark of sorts, when a fly finds its way into Brundle's teleporter and merges with Seth, taking us on a wild, horrific ride of de-evolution. Also co-starring John Getz as yet another 80s douche canoe, a part he plays maybe better than anybody else on the planet. This film was made on a budget of $15 million and brought in a box office of $60 million. I believe it's one of his most successful to date. So a nice win for our boy D. Crones. There's not a whole lot to this movie. That about sums it up. So before I get caught in a fly trap of spoilers, I'll throw it back to you as always and ask you, Jason, what did you think about this movie, bud?
And as always, Ryan, I'm going to be happy to tell you, but first, do you want to tell our audience if you dig what we're doing here on the show? Best way you can help us out is to go ahead and give us those likes, subs, rates, and follows. Leave us a comment if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast. You can send us an email, esotericacinema@gmail.com. So, Ryan, let's go ahead and get into our opening statements here. As far as I'm concerned, in many ways, The Fly is David Cronenberg's most accessible film, which is likely why it's also his most popular and successful. And it makes sense why, Structurally, if we look at it, the film is a concise, well-executed three-act structure. It heightens and steadily progresses to a satisfying and well-earned conclusion. We've got two characters with undeniable chemistry. They collectively occupy 90% of the screen time, playing Seth Brundle and Veronica Quaife, which I did not know that was her last name, and it's a little odd, but with the only third person being Stathis Borans. I'm telling you, Cronenberg has a way with those last names, man. Brundle, Quaife, and Borans. So
love it.
It makes for an easy story to follow. We don't have a ton of characters to keep track of. We've got a really brisk pace. The practical special effects still impress 40 years later. And while many of Cronenberg's other films tend to take on what I'd call art film sensibilities, right? The Fly maintains this determinedly popular sensibility, but it also stays true to his vision, So despite some gross sequences, it's an exceptional and surprisingly emotional story of a man who flew too close to the sun and ended up paying the ultimate price. Highly recommend this film to everyone except the most squeamish sorts. Ryan, how about you, buddy?
This is one of those films that a lot of us, myself included, had seen when they were younger and absolutely forgot what a banger this is. It wastes no time as Brundle is teleporting Veronica's undies in the first few minutes. There's also very little fat as we buzz along through this film, skipping quickly through each stage of Seth's transformation. I was pretty surprised at how engaging this whole thing was, considering the minimal location changes. You spend most of your time in Brundle's warehouse. It's a very small cast, like you pointed out, almost exclusively consisting of Goldblum, Davis, and Getz, just like you said. Also, you kind of know what's going to happen going into this film. There aren't too many big reveals or twists and turns. It just kind of is what it is. So all of this led me to a few conclusions here, that we were watching a tour de force of acting by Goldblum, first off, paired with an understanding of what this film was or wasn't by Cronenberg, all brought to life by the makeup and effects wizardry of a one Chris Walas. And we're going to talk about him ad nauseum here in just a bit. Geena Davis steps in as not only a love interest, but also sort of a voice of the viewer or the audience, adding in a nice dose of empathy into an otherwise horrific situation. This film stands as a testament to not get drunk and do science, kids. You may laugh, you may cry, you may throw up a bit in your mouth. But one thing I hope you do is love this movie as much as I do.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's a really wonderful film, and I'm looking forward to dissecting.
Ah, yes. So many fly puns to start the show. I love it.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for playing along.
By the way, if we have enough, we need to get like a little like digital fly in the little corner and like just buzzes every time we make like a fly pun. Like
perfect.
1, 3. So there are several aspects of the film that really work to deliver this wonderful experience that we have with the fly. And I think that the first of those has to do with sort of like the overall direction and execution of the film by David Cronenberg with regard to like just the basic elements of film, right? Like story, pacing, tone, plotting, character development, all that sort of stuff, right? Like a lot of the films, and especially the ones we've been looking at recently, maybe outside of Society, have a tendency to be kind of ambiguous and open to interpretation. You know, we're looking at films from filmmakers that don't want to put everything on the screen necessarily to tell you what it is. They want you to take it back and think about it, whether it's Possession or The Square, right? And this is very much not those films. You know, this is like a sort of like an old school sensibility to this film, which is interesting because I don't think David Cronenberg is, generally speaking, somebody that you would think of as having like mainstream sensibilities, right? But at the same time, I don't think that he ever sort of like sabotages who he is or what he's into, you know? I think that he sort of recognized that we've got like Goldblum and Davis with this obvious chemistry that would be foolish to sort of like take away from. And he also adds a lot more humanity into this film than just making it like another, you know, sort of like gross out feature. So I think that's sort of one of the things that I was most interested in is, again, just how very traditional of a story this is in the way that it's told, not necessarily in the way that, you know, some of the choices that it makes. The first half almost feels just like a romantic comedy. So it didn't feel lacking. It didn't feel like it didn't have enough substance. And so I was really interested by how it was simple, but then it also felt really dense, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. This is like the world's best peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You know, it's just like, it's simple. It's to the point. It's not anything it doesn't need to be. And yet it's the world's best that, you know what I mean? Like, it's just the perfect movie for me. This has got Ryan's name written all over it. I love this film so much.
95 minutes. Let's go right into that. The old infamous Ryan 95-minute special.
Yeah, let's get it. Let's cover that real quick because that's important. You know, we joke and tease on this show about how Ryan loves a good brief movie, get in, get out. But also, I would say that in this particular case specifically, this movie was so efficient. It was just like so streamlined. It wasted no time getting into it. Like I said in my opening statement, within the first few minutes, you're already back at his apartment or his warehouse of sorts. He's talking to Geena Davis. You've got two of the main characters already in play. He's showing you the teleporter and describing what's, you know, kind of teeing up the rest of the film. So you're deep into Act 1 already within the first few minutes. And consistently throughout this movie, he isn't afraid to, story-wise, drop you into the middle of things. For example, Geena Davis's relationship with her 80s douche canoe ex-boyfriend slash editor, I guess, or publisher of sorts. She's a reporter.
Yeah, Stathis.
Correct. Yeah, Stathis. So you kind of drop into the middle of that relationship. You drop into the middle of the teleporter scene stuff and all of that's going on. Yeah. He's consistently
even the opening of the film too. You know, like the way it starts off is just right in the middle of
Jeff
of a party. Goldblum talking to Geena Davis in the middle of the party. Like,
yes. There's no walking up the steps. There's no, you know, hey, how's it going? I'm so-and-so. It's like, hey, let me tell you about this thing I'm doing. Or, you know, you got a minute? Yeah. It's, I feel like Cronenberg trusts you as the audience. And I felt really cool about this, that like, hey, we're all big girls and boys here. Like, we got this figured out. Let's go ahead and show you some shit because we know what you're here for. You're here for the fly, and boy, are we going to get to it, and waste no time. So, and then it ends at the perfect time. So, keeping on the back end of that concise, expeditiousness or value package that Cronenberg has put together for you here. As soon as the movie's over, it's over. Roll credits. There's no touching sweet ending. There's no, fade out it ends. Roll credits. He sad ending, tragedy, and moving on.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Now I do have something interesting in response to that as well. And I think that's one of the aspects of Cronenberg's work that really makes it work is like Cronenberg is not somebody who's afraid to try things out and then leave them on the cutting room floor. We've talked about the expression kill your darlings, right?
Yeah.
And we see a number of examples of Cronenberg doing this, not on the film because a lot of the stuff was left off. But in doing some of the digging and the research and all of that, he was not afraid to cut whatever didn't work. So famously, we actually, talked a little bit before the show about that deleted scene. For everybody watching, there's a 7-minute deleted scene that takes place right in the middle of the movie that actually features a combination of the baboon and a cat that he tries to send through the transporters, and it mistakenly splices, and like he gets attacked by it and he has to beat it with a pipe, and then he's going onto the rooftop, and then he like has this leg growing out that he like ends up ripping off. And so it's like that stuff was all, they spent money, they spent time, like it's not just this superfluous imagery that they're getting rid of or anything like that. So on top of that, getting back to this and how this relates to the ending is that they actually tried multiple different endings. So the very first ending that they had was that whole thing happens and then we get a fade to black and then it comes back and we actually see that Geena Davis is in bed with Stathis and she's getting out. And that was what they went with in their first cut. And they played it to audiences and they were so pissed. Like if they had tomatoes, they'd have thrown that at the screen, right? Like they did not want Veronica to end up with Stathis by any means.
Okay.
And then they said they went through like 3 or 4 different codas, right? Just sort of wrapping up like, here's a scene of what happened afterward. And, showing Geena Davis pregnant, not pregnant, with Stathis, without less Stathis. They tried so many different combinations and would present them in the test screenings, and audiences hated them all. And so what Cronenberg realized is like, it was such a tragedy with that ending that after Brundlefly, is shot and dies, like the audience doesn't want anything more. Like they're sad, they're done, they want to go home.
It's exhausting.
Like, have a good cry about it. They're exhausted. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's like there's no follow-up scene that you can do that's gonna give them any level of satisfaction. Like just let them out. That's all they want. They just want to and so that's what they ended up doing, and that's works to the film's benefit,
It's fantastic. I will say that when it comes to Stathis and Brundlefly and all of that, I have here in my notes that it really does suck that these seem to be the only 2 people in Veronica's life. She has no one else to turn to. It's like, do I go back with my ex or do I stay with this human fly beast? It's like, baby, there's third options here. You don't have to choose between these 2. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's also mention that a huge amount of the success from this film comes from the overall sensibility with regard to that tone of compassion and that tone of somberness and all of that goes with, both the film and screenplay, which we should acknowledge, by the way. The screenplay is a David Cronenberg rewrite of a Charles Pogue script, which is based off of a short story by George Langland that appeared in Playboy. And so when Cronenberg speaks to Pogue's script, you can tell that like it wasn't where it needed to be by any means, and it probably wasn't great. But Cronenberg's a very genuine guy, and he gives a lot of credit. He's like, oh dude, a lot of the
you could say Canadian
that he came up right, he's Canadian nice, right? That's all you need to say.
I'm sure we have some Canadian viewers out there. You could say Canadian.
But what I love is that rather than like, there are so many people that would have done this like The Blob, right? Like where it's just like he's this Friday the 13th Jason serial killer who turns into a mutant and is like, blah, I'm gonna go and like terrorize the world, right? And he's like scaring old women and kidnapping babies, and then we've probably got like a a cop whose relationship is on the rocks who like really needs to catch this guy to save his marriage, right? And it would be like very rote and traditional, right? Like that. So but by taking this and rather than going that route with it, doing the whole creature feature, but then almost marrying it to being like a story of like illness, and there's a very strong relation between the degradation of the Seth Brundle character and the way that he is slowly turning into this fly, and the frailty that accompanies that after that initial burst of strength that he realizes. And it's interesting to see how it affects his psyche, how it affects the psyche of the woman that loves him. And along the way, it's making allusions to what I understand are, very significant and, traumatic moments that are shared by people who have all manner of various diseases and illnesses,
Sure.
So it's like, when he's looking in the mirror and, he finally notices, we've seen the hairs growing out of his body by now, but it's kind of one of those sobering moments where he finally sees these hairs growing out of his face, and he's like, trying to cut them off, and it hurts too bad. And so he gets frustrated and, breaks the razor and throws it in the bathtub and all that. And so, my understanding is that that's, people who have suffered from cancer and AIDS and all of these very, debilitating diseases, that's kind of, that sobering mirror moment is sort of something that is shared among many of those people. And so to take that and imbue that in here gives it this universality and sense of compassion that would otherwise be lacking,
Sure. I mean, it's something any of us can relate to, regardless of, it could be a cyst or a zit or, like you said, skin cancer or anything, but there's always that moment of you looking in the mirror and saying, what in the fuck is that? I should get that checked. And then, you do. And So just hope that you're not turning into a fly and, you got something a little minor and everything's all right. But yeah, I thought that was a tremendous scene. And, I just can't stress enough that we're dead smack in the middle of a body horror series. So far, we've done Society, now then Possession, now The Fly. We're moving on from that. And it did cross my mind, to your point here, that, I grew up in a Christian household, and in my very younger formative years, my youngest formative years, in the late stages of Satanic Panic. And, I was constantly taught that, horror movies are evil and heavy metal is evil and blah, blah, blah. And the older I get and the more influence I allow myself to absorb, the more I start to notice that the harder core the metal, heavy metal music, or the deeper the body horror, usually the more empathetic the message, like the more open, this stuff is. And it's like,
and the more like innocent and like happy, like the creators are, right? Like, Gojira is a perfect example. Like they're having their moment in the sun right now because they did the Olympics and everyone's like, finding these like hardcore metal dudes. But if you actually look at their lyrics, it's all about like how, we need to save the environment and be compassionate towards people. And so, people don't realize that for these people, it's all just a stage act, like
Brian Usna is like the nicest dude, Cronenberg, nicest dude, and then you got Zulawski with Possession,
very healthy people,
talking about misogyny and communism and making political statements and all of this stuff and feminism. And it's just like, man, like there's so much built into this stuff that you just pass by because you're like, ew, blood and guts, evil, demons, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but
dude, even modern day filmmakers like James Wan, he's like the nicest, most like polite and just soft spoken dude you've ever seen. And it's like, you made the Saw movies and Insidious and all that. And he's like, yeah, I did.
I was sold a bill of goods, as it were, a bill of goods. When I was a kid. These movies are great with a positive message.
Yeah. Interestingly, so I did happen to listen to the commentary track that's on the Blu-ray. And one thing I thought was very interesting is, again, it'd be very easy to see the makeup effects and, just Cronenberg's reputation and think of this just as some exploitative, cheap horror movie. But David Cronenberg literally describes this, and this is a quote here. He says it's, quote, ultimately a story of two healthy, eccentric people who fall in love. One of them gets sick and deteriorates until the other has to help them commit suicide. Like, that's such a depressing summary, but that's absolutely what this film is.
Sure.
And so, again, for someone coming through and being like, oh, that's a, exploitative video nasty with no substance to it. Like, just listen to that description and tell me there's no substance there,
Right. Yeah. And so not only has Cronenberg brought substance, but again, moving on to our next bucket of sorts, as we like to call them here, Goldblum and Geena Davis definitely give this movie substance. They are the heart and soul of this. And, I was racking my brain to think of who else could have played, this character of Brundlefly so perfectly and brought so much empathy and heart to an otherwise, horrific and terrible situation. And it's just, you don't want to say it's relatable because, he's turning into a fly based on a, transporter, fictitious sci-fi thing that's going on. But he does make it feel relatable. And Geena Davis, her counterpoint to that, kind of holding up a mirror. And again, like I said in my opening statement, she almost, to me, my point of view is that she was acting more or less as the voice of the audience or the point of view of us.
I just... I wanted to see you before.
You have to leave now.
All the way to the end, she still had empathy towards this and could not bring herself to pull the trigger until he said it was okay. And so, it's just fucking heartbreaking stuff to an otherwise silly, graphic horror.
Yeah, of course. From the very first frame, it's very obvious that Geena Davis and Jeff Goldblum just have an undeniable chemistry. Mm-hmm. And that actually makes sense because I didn't know this ahead of time, but after the fact, it turns out that they've been dating for some time prior to appearing in the film together.
I didn't know that
they
either.
actually weren't sure that they didn't really know that it was a good idea to get her because they're dating and is that going to be weird and all of that. But it's also funny because it makes a lot of sense to one of the aspects of production that Jeff Goldblum was talking about, which is he said that he sort of very sheepishly admitted that in real life, not playing Seth Brundle, but Jeff Goldblum was very territorial, so to speak, about his relationship with Geena Davis and John Getz being so close to her and having this relationship. And so he was hopefully it helped the movie, but basically he's I was actually very jealous in real life. And so when they would be off doing a scene together, I would just sort of show up and make myself visible to John in the background and stuff. And so obviously one of the animals that we are repeatedly exposed to in the film is the baboon, right? And so
what the fuck was that? Can you just get a baboon in the 80s? Apparently you can just get a baboon in the 80s.
Yeah, experimental baboons. You can do that,
Hey, man,
you want a baboon? I'll get you a baboon.
Yeah. Give me I'll take the Uzi. I'll take the kilo of cocaine. Oh, you got baboons. Great. Give me a baboon. Gonna need a baboon.
Yeah. Now, apparently in real life, baboons are very aggressive. And so I guess they've sort of shied away from them because they can be very aggressive on set.
You don't say. It's a fucking baboon.
But the funny thing is that because Jeff Goldblum was such a big guy and because he had to have this ripped physique, and because of his ripped physique, he's doing that thing that actors sometimes do where before a scene, he'll, and he's going to appear shirtless, he'll lift a bunch of weights or do a bunch of push-ups. So that he gets that nice swole look,
Yeah, I do that on this show too. I do that for us.
Yeah. So because of all of that, the baboon ended up looking at Jeff Goldblum as the alpha male. So I guess at one point they were saying that the baboon became severely attracted to one of the production assistants.
Oh, shit.
Super aggressive. And so Jeff Goldblum had to come over and gorilla yell at it and it back down and shit. Because it just
Jeff
respected Goldblum
man.
as the alpha male. So, which we all do. Jeff Goldblum is always the coolest guy in the room, right? He's always the most something in the room.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Jeff Goldblum will be noticed. I did not know. I don't remember him being so smoldering, but apparently this dude was just jacked and tall and lean and mean. I was not expecting that at all, but I was like, oh, Jeff Goldblum is, it was akin to seeing Leslie Nielsen in the Naked Gun movies when he was all ripped and shit. They put his head on somebody else's body or put a foam thing on there. But it was I felt like I was seeing ripped Steve Buscemi or something, because I'm used to kind of nerdy, sleek, kind of witty and quirky Jeff Goldblum. But I was like, oh, okay,
for sure.
This was a new Jeff Goldblum for me. You of course have the smoldering meme of Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park laying with his shirt unbuttoned in the perfect lighting. But this even took it a step further. I was like, man, he's got abs.
He was really into. He really put his all into this role. He understood it was a very physical role. And so in addition to just all of the physical work that he's doing as the Brundlefly version of the character, he also did, make a point to work out and get in good shape specifically for the scenes after he transports through the transporter.
Okay.
And he's, getting all strong and ripped and stuff like that.
Sure.
And absolutely. So it's funny because, there's the whole Olympic sequence, right? The little mini Olympic sequence where he does the thing on the chair and he puts his body completely out like a Cirque du Soleil performer. And then he does the imbalanced bars sort of stuff. They actually used gymnasts for that role.
Oh, cool.
So that when you pop out to the side, you can tell it's sort of a stunt double. But they actually got gymnasts. And apparently the funny thing is gymnasts will train for years for like one performance. So one of the things that Cronenberg was like surprised by, which makes sense after the fact, but like he couldn't just do 12 takes of that with one performer. The guy would do it like 3 or 4 times and then be like, dude, like my body is spent. I don't know if you realize how much goes into one of these performances, you know, like this is just something I can do for you a dozen times. So he ended up burning through like, I think 3 different gymnasts. And even that was difficult to cast because gymnasts are inherently so small and compact, right? But Goldblum is the opposite. He's 6'5" and lanky as hell.
Yeah.
He's like, so I had to find the absolute tallest gymnast I could find who's 5'8". He's the absolute tallest gymnast in the world, and he's 5'8".
Man, yeah.
Yeah, and here's the thing, you know, as far as the two of them are concerned, I do think Geena Davis is good in this role. I don't think it's a, you know, standout superstar best supporting actress type of role. I think that, you know, it's good. I think more than anything, it's the chemistry that she has with Jeff Goldblum.
Agreed.
That really steals the show. But Jeff Goldblum himself is an absolute rock star through the entire time. Like, this is his movie. He knows it. He came to play. He gave his all. He's not just, you know, working out and getting ripped. He's also really speaking to the degeneration of his body, right? Though the way that he, you know, has the crazy eyes behind the suit, right, as he like sort of gets closer and closer to being the Fly, and he's doing all these little ticks and stuff like that, you know. I think that we always respect when an actor really like digs into the physicality of a performance, right? Like it's one thing, it's always, you know, lovely and impressive to hear a magnificent orator get up and, you know, do the 12-minute Macbeth speech and all this stuff, right? Like, that's wonderful. But at the same time, just seeing someone like a legit thespian, like someone who is an absolute A-list rock star actor like Jeff Goldblum, watching him become a Fly, like, it just, there's something even more special about it, right? Because it's like, we know character actors, right? Like, we know some, you know, Andy Serkis, right? If you see Andy Serkis do the Fly, you're like, that trends. Like, it's a great performance, but like, yeah, that's what he does, you know? Jeff Goldblum is not that, you know, he's the, you know, tall, dark, and handsome, you know, look at that smooth, eccentric guy, to your point. So seeing him take on, you know, becoming a Fly and everything that goes along with that, I think gives it that added weight.
I agree. I would also add to that real quick that it's rare you get a Jeff Goldblum leading performance. He's always like the coolest part of a movie, but he's also like, he's like the mac and cheese, right? Like, you always love the mac and cheese, but it's a side item. But he, you know, it was a rare starring performance for him, as far as what I could remember. And I was all in for it. I'm surprised more of these don't exist.
Yeah, well, and on that note, interestingly, Jeff Goldblum was not necessarily their first choice. Now, it's not like he was their last choice or they necessarily had a first choice in mind. That was one of the things, they were having a really hard time figuring out who was going to be this guy because of everything that went along with that. And Jeff Goldblum was not a bankable star at the time, to the point that, like, it was one of those things that, like, someone sort of threw out as a joke, like, oh, what about Jeff Goldblum? Ha ha ha, right? And then, like, the room goes silent and it's like, what about Jeff Goldblum?
Right.
Now, this is the one interesting story I'll just do real quick. David Cronenberg was their first choice, but David Cronenberg had actually already agreed to do Total Recall for Dino de Laurentiis. So the producers, including Mel Brooks, had to get another director. And he was a very young guy. And the short version is that, unfortunately, he was from South Africa and he woke up to a phone call one day and his daughter was murdered in like an apartheid battle, unfortunately. Jesus. So they like held off on making the movie for a month and asked him if, you know, he would pick it back up, and he couldn't do it. And they gave him another 3 months and he still had to, unfortunately, back out. In that time, David Cronenberg ended up walking away from Total Recall because he had done a year of development and then had one conversation with Dino de Laurentiis, who went, oh no, that's not what we're looking for at all. We want you to do Raiders of the Lost Ark, but like in space. And David Cronenberg was like, well, this will never work. Good day to you, sir. And just walked away right then and there and was like, I don't make Raiders of the Lost Ark anything. That's not what I do. So he was then available. And so Stuart reached out back out and was like, hey, I understand you're available. What would it take to get you to do this movie? And he's like, $750,000 in my own crew. And they're like, cool. How about $1 million in your own crew? And he's like, Yeah. Okay. Done.
Sold. Right.
So that's how that got made.
Couple things you skimmed over very briefly. Let's go ahead and talk about number one. This is Brooks' film. And
Mel Brooks.
Exec produced this, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes, sir.
I did not know that until the credits rolled. And we had covered this before for Elephant Man, that
Correct,
Mel Brooks intentionally kept his name proper off of these films so that people didn't think they were comedies. They would still take them seriously. But he produced and gave a shot to a young upstart named David Lynch to make the Elephant Man. And now we're doing it again with old boy D. Crones and The Fly. So throughout the 80s, Mel Brooks was super sneakily responsible for some very crazy dramas and sci-fi and horror bangers. So credit where due. The next thing I would just tee up is, man, I would love to see Cronenberg's Total Recall. I do think Verhoeven did a great job.
Amazing.
I wonder how much of the Total Recall we got, if any of that was left over from those designs, because I guess it was several years later. I mean, we're going back to 86. I don't think Recall came out until like early 90s, mid 90s. So I'm sure Verhoeven, but man, like Quado and the Mars stuff and all the things. Yeah. I feel like that would have been right up Cronenberg's alley. And I also will say, I don't think we got Raiders in Space. I think it transformed into a more sci-fi horror movie that, I think would have been closer to Cronenberg's output. So would have loved to have seen that. I also, I'm going to need you to say South Africa properly. It's South Africa. South Africa.
South Africa, mate. South Africa. It's like Australia, South Africa.
Kind of. You also touched on Cronenberg, old D. Crones, and this is, by the way, our third Cronenberg movie we've covered on this show. We did The Brood, we did Videodrome, and now The Fly. And a running theme through all of that is exactly what you just pointed out, and then I'll toss it back to you after I kind of tee this up, and that is that he loves to work with his own crew. He has all the people that he is comfortable with, and he brings them along, including this go-round with one Howard Shore, who, goddamn it, just gives his all for all these movies. Yeah. We talked about this in The Brood, where you listen to The Brood, and it's like, who is this guy scoring? Like, what movie does he think he's making? Because this score does not fit this movie. And I would argue that this film is elevated yet again by the Howard Shore score. The Howard score, if you will.
The Howard score.
And do you have any input on that, or do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more interesting aspects of it is just how it very much plays to the emotional beats of the film, the way that any, really strong score does. But it's also not afraid to be used in a sort of bombastic fashion, So
bombastic.
At first, it's a little bit more subtle, but then by the second half of the film, we're getting these hugely operatic cues. Even an interesting story about the first screening that Mel Brooks watched, where on the way to the bar that Seth Brundle is going to ultimately break the dude's wrist at, there's a very quick shot of Seth Brundle like aggressively walking down the street. Okay. And the musical cue during that is like, it's like Cape Fear, like, bah, 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 right? And so Mel Brooks ended up approaching David Cronenberg after the initial screening. And he's like, hey, that one moment where the guy's walking down and the music's super loud. He's like, do we think that's a little much? Because he's just walking down the street. And Cronenberg looks at him and he goes, well, he may just be walking down the street, but he's also about to walk into his destiny. And Mel Brooks goes, fair enough. And that was that.
We talked about this with Shutter Island as well, like how bombastic the music was, to just the most simplest of things when Scorsese did that. So, yeah, similar type effect.
Yeah. And I do also want to say that as far as Jeff Goldblum not being their first choice, the studio actually didn't even believe in Jeff Goldblum. So something had happened where when this film was being made, there was like a changeover in the leadership at Fox.
Okay.
And so a new guy came in, and, Mel Brooks and Stuart went to him and they're like, hey, we're making this movie, The Fly, blah, blah, blah. We're still casting it. And, we're thinking about Jeff Goldblum. And he looks at him and he's like, I'm here to tell you that is the absolute worst decision that you could possibly make. However, I'm going to let it be your decision that you can live or die on. So I'm not going to tell you you can't get Jeff Goldblum. I will tell you that's an absolutely stupid idea and it will never work. And yet,
right.
you know.
I was racking my brain of who else could have played this role, and I was coming up short. Like, who else would I have wanted in this, in this scene? And I think that I can't imagine this movie it really is his film.
Yeah, exactly. And even down to, taking what could be really like cheesy material and delivering it with a certain like pathos and gravitas that gives it like the intended impact, so he's got that sort of now famous little monologue at the end about, insect politics and how insects don't have politics, and how, Geena Davis needs to leave because there's going to be a certain point of no return where he's just instinctively going to hurt her because he's now more fly than human.
I'm saying I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it. But now the dream is over and the insect is awake.
No, sir.
When you're a half fly, half monster under a ton of latex with contacts and weird teeth and stuff like that, and that could very easily just come across as like super cheesy. But to have a real actor, a talented actor, bring everything to that and take it with the seriousness. And that's the thing, is everybody takes this seriously. I imagine Cronenberg has to really appreciate that someone like Jeff Goldblum will take this so seriously, because it's like, he probably meets actors who are like, yeah, I'm doing the weird Cronenberg shit. He wants me to, do something about insect politics, whatever, right? Like, I'm waiting to do Hamlet or whatever. But like, here comes Goldblum, like, I will fucking crush this fly monologue with every fiber of my being.
Right.
He absolutely
Watch
does.
me go. Yeah. Yeah, because previously, with Videodrome, you're talking about James Woods, who did a suitable job, and Deborah Harry, did a great job with that, but nothing like this. And before that, I even forget the actor's name who was in The Brood. There's going to be some viewers that are watching this that are swearing at their screen right now. But we kind of said how soap opera-y that performance felt, kind of going through. So yeah, to all of a sudden land Goldblum, who was just driving it home, it's like, oh my God, like this is what's up.
Absolutely. And, the other defining aspect of this film that we can go ahead and like talk about in some greater detail would be, the art direction and makeup and special effects and just the overall look of the world, the sets, the creature itself. And, we got to give all the credit in the world. Obviously, we talked about Chris Walas, right? And he's responsible for the Seth Brundle and the Brundlefly evolutions over the course of the second half of the film. And, he's a stud in the industry. He's probably best known for his work here on The Fly, but also was responsible for bringing us The Gremlins, which is one of my personal favorite movies.
Yeah.
Amazing practical effect film. Not to mention, you had mentioned he did Enemy Mine, I believe.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and and I think one of the great things about it is that in approaching it in a practical way where it's this guy in a suit, it allows Goldblum to bring that humanity, I imagine one day effects will get to the point where eyes look like eyes, but I think that's still the one thing that you'll always be able to key in on when you're watching even the best CGI is like, eyes will never look like human eyes, because when we talk to people, like that's what we're used to seeing. We're used to looking people in the eye. And so we're very familiar with what the human eye looks like. And so I noticed that as I was watching Brundlefly, so much of his communicating when he's, in this big latexy suit and not really able to emote to the same degree that he is usually with facial tics and stuff, he lets his eyes do so much of the communicating, whether they're wild, whether they're tired, whether they're sad. And so, by doing this practical effect, guy in the rubber suit sort of approach, it allows Goldblum to bring the humanity out of that character. It's almost sort of like it reminded me of like a Phantom of the Opera type of character, or a Hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that, where, he's
or even
disfigured and he's gross. Yeah. Or Elephant Man, but we feel that sympathy and, deep down, he's got a good heart and we allow that to come through. So again, just instead of being like, look at that gross monster, we do feel that pathos for him.
Of course.
And then of course, we've also got all these practical effects, right? Just the absolute crazy, like, moments where we've got Goldblum in the bar, he's arm wrestling this dude and like breaks his wrist. We've got like the climax of the film with Brundlefly vomiting the acid on Stannis's hand and ankle that disintegrates them both. That doesn't even take into account the deleted scene we talked about with like the baboon cat hybrid and then the insect leg coming out. So, in addition to just doing like the suit itself, Chris Walas and his team was also able to execute some really excellent use of practical effects in the form of all these fun moments, you know?
Yeah, they won an Oscar for it, Best Makeup. So good for them.
We also have to give credit to the production designer and art director. So that would be one Carol Spear and one Rolf Harvey, respectively. And they were responsible for taking some of the elements of the previous screenplay where the writer was sort of thinking not in terms of David Cronenberg film, right? But just like a general science fiction film. And so Cronenberg being Cronenberg, you know, a large part of his distinctiveness is the visual sensibilities that he brings to his films.
Sure.
And so, but a lot of it is sort of stuff that he tasks to these very talented people that work with him. So for example, one of the elements that he had to sort of like liven up and like, you know, Cronenberg by 3 times, if you will, is the nature of the actual transportation cabinets. So when they were initially conceived in the initial script, they actually were just made of glass. They were made entirely of glass, and they were more boxy and rectangular, and they really did look like phone booths. So the funny thing is that I didn't know this before looking into it, but apparently David Cronenberg is a huge gearhead when it comes to like vehicles. So specifically, he loves cars and he loves motorcycles. So he takes Carol and Rolf into his personal garage and he brings them a motorcycle. And he's like, you see this engine right here? You see how it has all these sort of little lines and stuff like that? He's like, the teleporters should look more like this. They should look industrial. Here, let me just take this out. And so he like cranks out the engine, takes it out and hands it to them and was like, make the teleporters look like this. And so they were like, okay. And so that's when they ended up going back and, you know, giving it that distinctive look where you see like the ridges in it, right? And it's like sort of black. Like you can almost imagine it as a sort of like a cog in some sort of mechanical machine, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it has a bit of a Giger vibe to it, having just come out of Alien Romulus and seen a lot of Aliens movies recently. Been a very Aliens vibe because Romulus just dropped. So, yeah.
Also, I didn't know this beforehand, but it's all over the place. But the tagline, "Be afraid, be very afraid," came from this movie.
Be afraid, be very afraid.
Right.
Where,
I had no idea.
We've heard it 1,000 times. I didn't realize it came from this movie. It's the moment where Geena Davis comes home and sees, Seth Brundle with the woman that he's come home with from the bar. She looks at her, delivers the line. And this line actually came from Mel Brooks himself, too. It wasn't actually in the script, but David Cronenberg was talking about that moment with Mel Brooks, and he's like, I think she should be afraid. And Mel Brooks is like, well, yeah, she should be afraid. She should be very afraid. Look at the situation. And Cronenberg was like,
I could totally picture him saying that too. Yeah.
And then the last thing that I'll share that was that is one of my most favorite of the entire thing is the fact that, Ryan, did you know that for The Fly, Mel Brooks insisted on them going and having a promotional rock and roll song written for the film?
No, I did not.
Obviously, this is the 80s. This was a big marketing thing that came out in the 80s, right? Like you would have like the hit song,
sure.
Kenny Loggins' Highway in the Danger Zone, Eye of the Tiger, all these different things. And so, of course, the name of the song they contracted was called Help Me, right? Because it had to be. When it came to Cronenberg, he was like, cool. And then was just like, I can't use this. Where, like, do you know the film that I'm making? Like, where would this go? But like they had already contracted it and paid for it. And so Mel Brooks was actually quite insistent. He's like, no, you need to use it. We paid for it. It's great for marketing. Everyone wants the song. We got to have the song for the music video and all of that, right? And he's like, okay, but it's a rock and roll song. Like, just watch the movie. Just after the first screening. If you still think it should be in there, tell me and I'll find a spot for it. So like Mel Brooks walked out and like, yeah, you're right. We can't use that in that movie. That wouldn't make any sense. Like, cause he was literally wanted him to put it right after they cut. Like when that first Chris Walas credit comes up, we cut to rock and roll song. You imagine this like hugely traumatic, Seth Brundle dies and Geena Davis collapses to the floor in tears while Stannis, just lost his head. And then it's like, help me, buddy. I gotta help me, buddy. Right? Like whatever it is, like he's gonna be so emotionally wrong for that moment. And so they realized after the fact that it wasn't. So they actually did find a place to put it in the movie. And it's the background song that is in the bar. So if you go back and you watch that scene and you hear that background song, know that that was supposed to be the marketing song with a music video and everything for David Cronenberg's The Fly, which is insane.
The only song I want to hear at those end credits as they roll is Sweet, Sweet Victory by SpongeBob's. They give me that while the credits roll. Some movie needs to do that for me. I want to hear that.
So Ryan, now that we've gone ahead and wrapped up our formal review, let's go ahead and get into our top 3 moments from David Cronenberg's The Fly. Let you kick us off. What you got, buddy?
My 3 favorite moments are Seth and Veronica in the apartment for the first time, or the warehouse of sorts, the chemistry, the Goldblum charm and wit, the way Geena Davis volleys with him back and forth. It reminded me a bit of Goldblum and Laura Dern interacting in Jurassic Park. Just that good witty banter, just good chemistry, kind of tease up the whole rest of the film. They're establishing a lot of their relationship right up front that is going to lead you through the empathetic world that they take you on along the way. The next one is the medicine cabinet scene, the National History Museum of Brundle, as he calls it, I believe, something along those lines. So I love that when he's pulling things apart and then he opens the medicine cabinet and you see all the pieces of him that are falling off. Just such sweet, sweet chef's kiss 80s horror stuff. This is also kind of when the movie peaks. Like when you hear the last click of the roller coaster and start to descend, because right after this, it's just all downhill from there. Just shit starts to hit the fan. And then, of course, how could you not mention the finale? We know it's coming. It doesn't matter. It's so cool and gross and heartbreaking anyways. When Brundlefly takes that gun and puts it up to his temple and lowers his head as if to say, it's okay, please kill me. I've never felt so bad for a pile of mutant nonsense goo in my life.
Right? It's so sad.
Like I said in my opening statement, bravo to Goldblum, Davis, Cronenberg, and all of them for building all of that heart into the situation throughout the film. And super kudos to Chris Walas, of course, for being able to see it through and pay it off. The only thing I would add to that is if you're going in like John Getz's character to go save somebody and you're going to go be the hero, put the gun together first before you go in there. When he went in there with the gun in the case, then he opens the case and he starts assembling it all. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? You're in danger.
I'm in danger.
You need to get out of there or put the gun together a little faster. He's like, hold on, gotta screw it, gotta click it and then put this. And I'm like, oh my God, the guy brought Legos to a knife fight. So anyways, those are my 3 favorite scenes. How about you, Jason?
Absolutely. So number 3, I've got the first recognition of those thick hairs on his back. You know, early on, he rolls over on like this microchip thing, and then it sort of exposes this blood. And then that's when Geena Davis is, rubbing his back at some point, and she notices these super thick hairs on his back. It's just weird and gross enough to let you know that like something's going on. And as a sort of starting point for the inevitable weirdness and hugeness that is to follow later, it's a really, really effective starting beat for all of that's going to come later. The second that I would have is actually the first reveal of Brundlefly, when he comes out and he's on the crutches and he's wearing the rubber gloves, the yellow rubber gloves and all of that, because he's so weak in that moment. Like we've just gone from seeing regular Jeff Goldblum, who's a specimen in and of himself, to immediately post-transportation Jeff Goldblum, where now he's a gymnast and he's going for 3-hour marathon sex sessions and, grabbing women and throwing her shoulder and working out to insane degrees and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so to go from that to just him walking out on these crutches and thin and waifish and his hair is falling off and he's all deformed and everything, and just the decrepitness with which, Jeff Goldblum carries himself through that. It was so shocking. And it's so, again, for a movie that is really all about the emotions and the somberness. It does a very good job of giving us that. And then, on the other side of that, just because I love me some good old fashioned gross out horror, my number 1 is at the very end, the scene where Brundlefly vomits acid on both the hand and ankle of our Stathis character.
So
right?
good.
Completely melting the hand, melting off his ankle.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there's 2 shots when the acid is vomiting out where we actually see that it's the only time that they actually use a rubber construct of Brundle. So it's not, they didn't set up like a tube beside Jeff Goldblum's mouth and then shoot him so that it looks like it. They like actually had the acid spewing out of the mouth because they made a rubberized reconstruction of Brundlefly.
Okay.
So there's two different shots where they use that, and it's the time where he vomits the white acid on his hand, and then again when he does it on the ankle later.
So when you say that there's a missing potential ending that they did away with after test screenings, where Stathis is in bed with Veronica, I almost wonder if he did or did not have his hand and foot in those scenes.
They probably kept him under the bed, right? It's like, oh, Stannis, you're under the covers, you're sleeping. She's gonna get up and we're gonna follow her. You remain sleeping, right? That's like an easy way to get around that, something like that. Yeah, I love those three moments. And then of course that brings us to our next feature, 3 adjectives. Ryan, give a quick breakdown of 3 adjectives before you tell us what yours are.
3 adjectives are how you would describe this film in just a brief little word or two, or a little dose of wordplay. If you just walked out of the movie theater and your friend texts you, how was it? This is what you would say to them. And I'll give you some examples. My first one, you kind of touched on earlier, but I'll go ahead and say it anyways. 8-ounce filet mignon. It is a super lean juggernaut cooked to perfection and was the perfect amount on the plate. Just absolutely simple, but the best version of that thing. And you want it over and over again as often as you can. My second one is because of all the things. And my third one is stage play, because it does kind of play out like a stage play. It's mostly on one location in his warehouse. It is mostly 3 people. And so you really could do this as a stage play. It kind of felt that way. And I felt like they were taking the acting as serious as that. I will just go ahead and add that it's my understanding Howard Shore made an opera of this film that played for limited engagement. So I would love to get a hold of some of that footage of a Howard Shore scored and written The Fly opera. I need to see that.
That's amazing. I would love to see that. I'd pay good money for that for sure.
How about you, Jason?
Yeah, I was try to take a few different approaches. At first you're just, you got 3 words, and then it's almost like owning a cat. Your very first cat name is a regular cat name, and then it evolves, and by the time you get to like your 8th name, it's like, oh, Mr. Pudding Pants Esquire the Third, how lovely to see you, So this iteration of 3 adjectives is inspired by Jeopardy categories. So I feel like each 3 of these could be Jeopardy categories.
Awesome.
First is a somber affair, right? It's just it's which also speaks to its sort of like literary qualities, which could also just be more like theatrical qualities like you're talking about, right? But it almost does sort of feel like some sort of like, it could have been like a Victorian era romance, but it also just happens to be set in the 80s with crazy sci-fi.
This could be the Black Plague or the bubonic plague or something. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Someone that loves somebody that's getting sick and slowly dying. Same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Untraditionally traditional. Like I said, it's very traditionally assembled and made and shot, even just literally the directorial decisions of, okay, let's get the 2 shot and then let's go in for the coverage, single shot, reverse shot. It's not a ton of, dolly movements. And then third and finally, we have mutate-o-rama, because for as much as this is also just a somber, wonderful experience, there is a good amount of creature goodness and mutation stuff and teeth falling out and hair falling out. And Jeff Goldblum crashing through the window, in full latex man in the rubber suit when she's trying to get the abortion and all that. So like, there's just so many like fun little moments of that, horror and gore and all of that we love, mixed in with all of the, legitimate approaches at somber storytelling. So somber affair, untraditionally traditional, and mutate-o-rama. All of this adds up to a star rating for your boy Jason of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really loved this movie. Near perfect experience. Every time I watch this, I watch this every 2 to 3 years, and I'm always reminded of how wonderful of a film this is. And I can't imagine that score ever dropping any lower than that. How about for you, sir?
Dude, I'm giving this 5 stars and a fuck yes to this movie.
Hell yeah, dude.
This is the perfect film. There's nothing I can find that, and I would watch this right now. I would watch this tomorrow. If you want to watch it with me right now, like, yeah, let it roll. I'm down. I love this movie. Yeah. 5 stars.
So that wraps up our review of The Fly. 4.5 from Jason, 5 stars from Ryan. Wonderful film. Both of us couldn't recommend it higher. Do want to remind you, if you do enjoy what we do here on the show, please like, subscribe. Check out the website, give us those ratings, all that fun stuff. Really helps us out. For myself, Jason Peters, for my boy Ryan Siebold, this has been Esoterica Cinema. Enjoy the movies!